Good evening, everyone. I was just reflecting on what Syed was saying about London catching up with the rest of the country in terms of general community energy activity, because, 3-4 years ago, we were embarrassingly behind the majority of the country, and thanks to a lot of our hard work and resourcefulness, tenacity, blood, sweat and tears, we're now bucking the trend, thanks to a myriad of reasons. And this leads me to think about, that we are all striving for an affordable, clean, decentralized energy system, because that's what we need to tackle the twin social justice issues of both climate change and fuel poverty. But quite often, and I've been accused of this from the very early days of SELCE, 8 years ago, but that's because for 18 years on and off, I've worked on fuel poverty and energy advice projects. And where are we today with this? Well, people generally are now having conversations about talking about decarbonisation and fuel poverty together, which is really heartening. We've seen more groups in London starting to diversify the types of projects they're doing under their community energy banner, which is amazing. And we're going to hear about some of those in a minute. But it's also against the backdrop of, unprecedented times of, global pandemic and energy prices literally being on everybody's lips because of the situation we're all finding ourselves in, that it's not just us energy nerds that are looking at, how and where and how much our energy is costing. So there's probably been never more of an important time to be talking about fuel poverty and energy efficiency projects. But as most of you know, I'm pretty biased about that. But, just looking at how the impact of fuel poverty is already affecting Londoners. For example, in Haringey, since the pandemic, the numbers in fuel poverty have jumped from 12 to 18%, and that's fairly across the board, which results basically as an extra 666,000 households plunged into fuel poverty as an immediate impact from the pandemic. That came out last year from some analysis the Citizens Advice did, and yet still across London, advice in terms of access, quality and piecemeal is, worrying. And that it's given often when it's not an active community energy group by agencies that often just turn their hand to energy advice because they've got some funding to do it, rather than it being their main raison d'etre. Anyway, I'll get off my hobby horse in a moment, but this is really interesting that we're starting to think about tackling fuel poverty, energy efficiency. There's some government moves towards it, but I don't need to say too much about the failed Green Homes Grant debacle. Yes, we're seeing some sort of resurrection through utilising the LAD mechanism. Sorry, I was trying not to play acronym bingo, local authority delivery mechanism. Yet, today we've had the announcement even of the extra 500 million going to be available for households. Yet, well, the End Fuel Poverty Coalition did quite a quick analysis of where it was falling down and how and where and why. But again, it's, we need to be decarbonising, we need to be tackling fuel poverty. How can we contribute to that as community energy groups? We know why, but even the GLA, it's a bit curious about what's going on with the fuel poverty advisory group that they did have, and it's sort of been slightly mothballed. Hopefully it's going to be resurrected. It really needs to be, and we'd really like to see that. We'd also like to see what we can learn from the other work that's been going on in other areas of the country, so we can bring it in more for ourselves in London. So we're going to hear a little bit about the SELCE 4 funded works now, which includes some workshops that SELCE did in partnership with CREW and how that impacted. Then we've got to hear about a few projects from Cara, from Energy and the Muswell Hill Sustainability Group working up in Tottenham. And hopefully if Tanuja can join us, if not, I can say a few words about the Pernal project. And these were where groups have, for the first time, or in a more meaningful way, actually had a go at doing some fuel poverty and energy advice projects with the Champion model, thanks to funding from the London Community Energy Fund. So this was an amazing learning journey that we've all been on. And that's one of the ways that SELCE, South East London Community Energy, of which I'm a co-founder director of, started doing some of our work, whereas now, fast forward several years, we have a kind of full service energy advice suite of interventions, and G's going to sketch out for us the impact of the work that we did last winter as hopefully a bit of inspiration of where your group could end up having some sort of impact and accessing for help for residents in your locales. Then we want to have a little sort of discussion about what other groups might like to do. What help would you need to be able to do that? Would it be a symposium on what the strategy should be for community energy groups in London, or how we can maximise impact for little input resources, or how we could, what we'd like to see and what we're hoping for in SELCE 5 even. Then we'll kind of look at next steps, and just to see basically fuel poverty not be quite such the poor second cousin, and actually to have an equality in terms of energy efficiency, which is more sort of accessible if you are more comfortably off, alongside the more sexy renewables generation and heat projects. So that's just what we're going to do for the next hour. What I will carry on talking about just very quickly is sketch out with my CREW energy hat on what we did with the Fuel Poverty Levelling Up London programme, where we got a bit of funding from the SELCE 4 for SELCE and CREW to work together to design a programme to actually help groups think about what they needed to learn about and think about before they set sail on doing some sort of energy advice or fuel poverty initiative. So I'm just going to give you a flavour of how it worked, what it covered, what the impact is, and where we're at with it currently, because we haven't quite wrapped that up, but just to set the scene, as it were. Then there was a bit of crossover where we'll then hear about the work that Energy have done with Cara. Hopefully we'll bring in Tanuja and then G at the end, and then I'll have a little chat. So back to talking about levelling up London. How did we do that? Well, we put our heads together and we, based on our lived experience, our policy know-how and general arm wrestling between G and I of what we thought was most important to include in such a session, we put together a series of workshops which were held in the evening over 2 weeks, where we had 2 sessions where we looked at how to help move groups from not maybe knowing too much about how to do these sorts of projects, to have them to be in a position where they could understand what was required in terms of the business of being able to do these projects, to then be able to undertake one. So we advertised it mostly to CEL members, and we had quite a good turn up. I think we had about 9-10 participants from the group. Some of you in the virtual room here were there today, and we went a kind of an academic kind of you know, the theory and policy stuff. What is fuel poverty, the facts and figures, how to define what we mean when we're talking about interventions into fuel poverty. It was very much a participative structure because well, we like that kind of thing and we're biased, but also to learn together. And the breakout groups went down very well in the feedback. So we were looking at how people would have to, if they were going to work on such a project as a volunteer or paid worker, what skills they'd need, and how they could be funded and what qualification or experience would need. Then we looked at the types of projects that you could do and their kind of impact matrix, so people could understand what might be like resources but could have maximum input or vice versa, and how to sort of just take that back to their group to look at what might work in their local community with their particular needs already within the community. We gave some sort of background information of sources and trusted sources of information and policy to inspire and flesh out some of the work that we'd started to touch on in the workshop. Then the next session we looked at what people could do to actually support an individual in fuel poverty from an advisor or a worker perspective. We then looked at what you needed to recognise to make sure that you were designing a good project to meet the needs of the areas, and that how to fill in the gaps of what was already on the ground, and what steps you might have to take as an organisation, from getting the commitment from your own community energy group board, because you might have, you know, some solar evangelists that might need a bit of convincing, and, you know, whether you're going to take a community or geographical focus on your project, what your comm strategy could be, and what your outreach materials need to look like, and have you got all the policies in place, and health insurance and safety, and how to then get the funding and the training in place so that you're then in a position to do it as well as possible. Also about why you'd want to be doing that. Hopefully everyone in this room understands why it's important to do it, but we then looked at understanding about the community need, defining who those were and where you might find them, and thinking about groups that the community energy group could partner with. And then we looked at understanding the gaps in provision. So you might already have an organisation that does home visits, but there's nothing on telephone advice or community workshops or energy advice cafes. How to learn and will stand on the shoulders of people that have already done it before, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. Looked at how to design a comms sort of materials and outreach strategy, so that people could actually go away with something to answer some of the questions that their board might immediately, you know, feel resistant to, and look at how you would need to look at information storage and collecting data and case note system, which is completely different from keeping a list of all of your investor members, for example, and what you needed to look at from a policy and procedures point of view. And that also a light touch onto sort of data protection and safeguarding. And then we were looking at all the risks and how to mitigate those for yourselves as a group, and also funding and what we could cover for next steps, and how to approach different types of funders to get this. And we lightly touched on skills. The second part of the programme that we did as this micro pilot to level up London's community energy groups was looking at working intensively with groups to pay for funding to get the level 3 energy advice qualification for someone from one of those groups, and also to have some paid for consultancy support, peer mentoring, whatever that particular group needed that would help them get to a point where they would be ready to submit a funding bid. And that leads me rather nicely onto introducing my next speaker, because there was a crossover with our project and the next one, thanks to Cara's work, and which I was also involved with. But I'd like to hand over now to Cara Jenkinson.
Thank you very much, Alex. I'm going to share some slides if that's okay. Right, so let's see if that works. And then I'm just going to do slideshow. So just okay. Can you see that? Okay. Good.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so probably the first thing that's worth saying is that I probably shouldn't be the one doing this presentation, because a lot of this work and what we've done in this project has been down to others, namely Sydney Charles, who couldn't be here. Well, she joined the first bit of the meeting, but she's had to rush off to something else. Project coordinator Laura and Alex, without which this absolutely should have been completely fundamental to this project. So I feel slightly fraudulent presenting this, but anyway, I will go ahead. So Entenergy has been going for a long time, actually. So we were one of the early community energy groups in London, started in 2009. And we were very lucky to get, when there was the low carbon challenge or something, it was a really old stream of funding, which was incredibly generous and allowed us to put solar panels on the roof of Marks and Spencer's on our local high street, and also on the Muswell Hill Methodist Church. You can see two of those roofs there. And then we went a bit quiet again on the solar, but then we got active again, actually because of the LCF funding, and that allowed us to do feasibility and to start getting some work done again. And we did two quite big schemes on a secondary school on the borders of Wood Green and Tottenham called Woodside, and on Fortismere School in Muswell Hill, and the last of those was completed in 2019. So we've got our 4 sites. At our last AGM in November last year, we had a guest speaker, and that guest speaker was Alex. And I remember sitting there and just thinking, my goodness, they're doing so much, we could be doing so much more. And being very, slightly feeling a little bit down as to how little we were doing. But I think what she was doing on the fuel poverty side really struck, both Sydney particularly and me and various others. And then the funding opportunity came along through LCF4 to try and put a project together. So now, I don't know if you know Muswell Hill. Muswell Hill is a fairly affluent area. So we've been the kind of community benefit money that we generate out of Entenergy tends to go into our sister organisation, Muswell Hill Sustainability Group, and we do stuff around green. We've got our Green Open Homes weekend coming up in November. That's the kind of thing we focus on, which is usually kind of quite big middle-class houses that have done lots of green stuff, and we open them up and inspire people to do more. So that's the kind of thing we tend to fund. We haven't done much about fuel poverty, partly because fuel poverty is less of an issue. There is some fuel poverty, but less of an issue where we are. So what we decided to do was link in with another community group, which isn't about community energy. It's far more general. So let me see if I can move my slides. So this is the community group, and it's just notice it hasn't actually got the name on it. It's Living Under One Sun. And they so it's managed by an incredible woman called Layla Laksani, and she basically they do so many different activities, whether it's food growing, whether it's gardening, whether it's training people to ride bikes, women's exercise groups, You can see sewing. There's all sorts of stuff that goes on there. And it's really great, just engaging across the community, and it's a real range of people. And just a bit of context about Tottenham. I mean, Haringey is very much a borough that's split between east and west. The west is relatively affluent, the east is absolutely not. There has been particularly affected by the pandemic, so very high unemployment, and as Alex said at the beginning, high fuel poverty. All sorts of communities there. There's a big Latin American community, West Indian, African, all sorts of backgrounds living in Tottenham. And this is a picture of the amazing Layla Laksani, who set it all up. And so we had a meeting with Layla. It would have been probably around April, May time, something like that, and about a potential project and what that could look like. She was really keen that we built the capacity of her community. What she didn't want was a project where people would come in, give energy advice, and then walk away again. She wanted to train people so that the community could become more self-sufficient. She is all about capacity building. So that's how we designed the project. So the project was to train energy champions in providing energy advice. And we trained 7 in all. We did want to do more, so it would have been nice to do a few more, but we trained 7 in the end that got to the end of the sessions. We had 6 2.5-hour, might even have been 3-hour, Alex, I remember that, training sessions over June and July. And the idea was that they didn't just receive the training, the energy champions, but they also provided advice to 3 households, and they were kind of handheld a bit in doing that. And one of the aspects that we included was to pay for some tablets so that they could actually use that to look things up, whether it's energy tariffs or switching or grants or whatever, so they could actually use those. And yeah, keeping in mind that that most of the people doing this training didn't have access to that kind of technology, and that we had to do the training also as a mixture of online and in person. There was that because of the COVID restrictions when we started. So in terms of kind of who did what, so that's kind of splitting between everyone that was involved. So we created the bid, I should say Sydney predominantly, applied for the funding. We interviewed and recruited the project coordinator, and we remained part of the steering group throughout. Living Under One Sun hosted the sessions on their site, the physical sessions, and of course brought the community with those kind of strong links to built over many years. Alex provided the training and got it AQA certified. And then our fantastic project coordinator, Laura, was involved in recruiting and then supporting the energy champions. And she has made such a difference to that, to this project. And that is the end when they all got their certificates. And it was a fantastic session, actually. It was so nice. We all had food prepared by Living Under One Sun, and a local councillor came and awarded the certificates. And it was a really lovely day that we spent. Actually, the woman in the middle, Senna, has actually gone on to do level 3 training, as has Laura. Laura, I think, was already doing it, but Senna now has gone on to level 3. And also off the back of this project, Layla has been decided to start she calls it energetic cafes, which I think is a really nice word, because actually she combines it with exercise classes, which is a very interesting way of getting people involved. And she's managed to get I think she had 13 people the first week she ran it. I think she ran it again this week, and she's also started working alongside it. Some of you may be aware of Heat, that work in Waltham Forest and other boroughs, and she's bringing in Tom as well to sit with the energy champions and with Laura to continue that upskilling. Next steps, we want to put a bid together for a much bigger project to train up more people and to do more outreach. So yeah, that's a quick overview. I'll stop sharing.
Fantastic. Thank you, Cara. Yeah, it was a real privilege and honor to work on this project, actually. It was such the diversity. I was the only native English speaker. Brilliant. It was the first time I'd ever tried to do Energy Champions online. That was interesting, but we still managed to create. Thank you for the brilliant comments in the chat, everybody. Really appreciated, because it was a challenge initially, but then, you know, we rose to it. We still created a sense of a mini community of energy champions on this journey for people to have demystified their energy bills for themselves, and then to share that within the community. And we have done an impact sort of report that will be going to the you know, into CEL and to the GLA, and hopefully we'll be able to make that public. But the, you know, all of the stats of showing people's sort of journey into learning and upskilling and community cohesion and capacity building, it was just phenomenal. And, you know, they were just such a beautiful group of people to work with. They, like, I got a bit emotional at one point. Anyway, thank you, Cara. That was a good rollicking ride through what we did up in Tottenham. Now, let me just have a look. Do we have a Tanuja in the house, or shall I talk on her behalf about what we did in Islington?
Yeah, she's not there, I don't think, Alex.
Okay, let me pull up the impact report and share a few highlights from that project. While I'm doing that, it was just fascinating from my perspective, actually, to essentially at the core of it, you would think a little bit of funding, working into North London community energy groups, doing an energy champion program would be very simply au contraire, Blackadder. It was so different. It was fascinating from my point of view in terms of responding to the community and how it got rolled out. And obviously there were some common denominators, but it was, you know, markedly different. But I think that just really reflects how different our communities are, even within, you know, right next door to each other in London, and how adapting to their needs and the collective intelligence about that particular community is really important. So I'm hopefully going to do a bit of justice to the Punnel project, and I'm just going to share my screen with and just highlight a few nuggets, for want of a better word, with your good selves. Now, am I able to share my screen? Yes, I am. It's always a good start, isn't it? So we had Punnel looked at doing an online Power Up Energy Champions program, which was then supported by some one-to-one cafes with the local community. So similar approach, identified a local community partner to work with, the amazing Caxton House in Islington. And you would think, you know, Islington, it's got a very strong reputation for, it was the birthplace of Shine and lots of other interesting community energy projects happening. But we hopefully brought something slightly different to the table and amplified existing things, impact on the ground. So the common denominator with the LUOS project. We had online energy advice champions trained up, and these were a mixture from across London as well as from the local community, and there weren't any expectations of them to use that. And we even had a couple of repowering, a volunteer and a staff member, I think, come along to the training as well. So that was really very cool that we were getting extra benefits to the community energy community. Before we delivered it, we asked the participants about their learning expectations and what they needed from the project so we could measure the impact afterwards. And I hope you can see on your screen there that generally there's a big gap, which is on the positive side, between the pre and post learning of the, because we looked within the training, we didn't just look at the nuts and bolts of what people needed to know about switching or EcoFlex grant programs, or what the warm home discount was, or what WaterSure is, or how to apply for the X, Y, and Z, whatever we're looking at. We also wove in other things about the communication skills needed, because it's a conversation between two people, and generally if you approach people going, hey, let's talk about your energy bill for an hour, most people would run in the opposite direction. So how to actually have rapport building but professional boundaries, how to deal with over chatty or very reticent clients, and actually how to deal with difficult situations, because we've seen such a spike in, rather than the heart-rending impact of clients being few and far between, it's probably every other client in dire circumstances. And it can be whether it's families with young children through to the stereotypical grannies being terrified of putting their heating on and sitting in bed all day with blankets and hats on. So, and it was also about self-care as well, which was something else that we identified in designing this program was going to be really important, and also for champions to support each other and to come together. So basically the first part of the training program, that we can see there that everybody felt that they wanted to highlight. I'm getting a bit choked up because Tanuja was very kind to point out that she'd never seen, to help us improve, please rate the training excellent. That's probably maybe the only time I've ever got 100%. So that was quite a nice thing. And that's why it would have been nicer for me not to be talking about this, going, hey, look at me, everybody. So scrolling on quickly, we also looked at the qualitative, how we could improve and what we could look to take on board for future programs in Islington. And then we ran a couple of sessions giving energy advice actually at Caxton House. So from the training point of view, there's, I mean, Tanuja's an absolute, she doesn't just do something, she does it to the nth degree. I'm just in awe of her ability, of everything that she does and how she does it. And it was actually really nice to have someone from the community energy community who was a colleague, a comrade from the last couple of years, actually attend one of a course I'd done to actually go through that journey and see, another type of skill that I deploy. But I've definitely had my appreciation of her skills of just being phenomenal and doing things very, very well. Then we ran a couple of workshops in the community at Caxton House, where we had some extremely vulnerable, and we had to, in the first session we had 2 octogenarians who, I think it was maybe their second time out since the pandemic had hit, come along to the sessions, and unpicking some of their very complex cases to actually be able to intervene and help and signpost them to things, and you know, absolutely humbling, beautiful stories that with the advisors being able to practice some of their skills they've been learning, but also having that taster of working in an intensive way. And the people that came along to those sessions were because of that trusted place that Caxton House had in that community and the way that they do things. And if they say, hey, this is really good, you should get along to this, then people will rock up and come along. It was very much helped by Tanuja's awesome baking skills, because her cakes were amazing, but then it also helps to destigmatize having an advice session, because then we're just a group of people having a chat about things over a cup of tea and a bit of fruit and a bit of homemade cake, and we could reach the hard to reach in a way that hadn't been done before, and then we could signpost them on along to the home visit program through Shine, through the extra help unit with citizens advice for complex billing situations, through to infusing people about taking tangible action for the climate emergency and them wanting to know how to become champions themselves. So now we're in a conversation with Caxton House about they've got an excellent reputation for doing creative workshops and artistic workshops and responding to what the community says that it wants and needs to do. So we're looking at writing a bid to actually apply to the Energy Redress Fund, weaving in all of the learnings from this and what we heard from the community. So, you know, it was, you know, a very small amount of money that we've had a huge social impact across both of these projects, I would say. I'm obviously biased, as you've already heard. I've been involved with both of them. And then the next speaker, I'm also involved with. So it's a bit of a Alex show. So I apologise about that, everybody. But I'd like to bring in my colleague and esteemed comrade, Dr. G. Speciale, to talk about where these sorts of projects can lead to as you build up your experience and track record of energy advice in the community. So G, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Alex. So I think I've been asked to speak just to give those of you who don't do fuel poverty alleviation work a sense of what that kind of work can look like if you as a group really invest in it. So I'm going to share my screen.
You're sharing your I don't know what just happened to the camera, but
yeah, I had to shut my laptop. There we go. Go on. Can you see that?
Oh, there we go. Yeah, thanks.
So, from the beginning. So, I mean, I suppose I just wanted to start about talking a little bit about our view about where fuel poverty fits within our work.
Could you get closer to the mic, please? It's slightly muffled. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about where we, as a group at South East London Community Energy, feel fuel poverty work fits within the rest of our work. Like many groups, we own and operate community finance solar. We also do a lot of work on the energy efficiency front. But I think it's really important to start by saying we have always thought that you cannot address climate emergency without tackling inequalities, particularly in energy. The energy revolution that we need must not leave those who are most vulnerable behind. And I think that's that sort of sensibility that this is an integral part of the transition we need to see has very much guided our work over the past few years. We started off as a group 6 years ago, getting a tiny bit of funding from the Energy Saving Network, and then gradually building to slightly bigger pots, We started off delivering energy cafes. We then had quite a lot of focus. We moved into a focus in partnership with Lewisham Council. And I can see Martin here. It's great to see you there. In partnership with Lewisham Council, focusing on looking at how we could get funded energy efficiency measures into fuel poor households in Lewisham. And now I think we deliver what I hope is a wraparound service. I should also say that fuel poverty is rife. Before the pandemic, there was about 1 in 10 households on fuel poverty across Lewisham, Greenwich, the area in which we focus. Now it's more like 1 in 12, 1 in 13. It manifests itself as a really tough choice on a daily basis between getting into debt or turning off your heating. And of course, there are long-term consequences of living in a cold home, both mental and physical. We're talking about, a daily tragedy, huge amounts of misery, that sort of downward spiral of being cold, not being able to think, and therefore not really being able to think constructively about the problem, and it's cycling down. And what happened at the start of the pandemic is that the phone started to ring. Normally in March, we would be winding down our work for the year, but the phone started to ring and it kept on ringing the whole way through lockdown. There has been a massive increase in vulnerability. There has always been fuel poor, but we're seeing with people losing work or having big reductions in their employed work, with people being furloughed but only having 80% of their income. If you're on minimum wage, 80% of your income is just not enough. Real misery amongst those who have no recourse to public funds and had suddenly lost their jobs. So what do we do? What does a fuel poverty service look like? Well, we give advice on, and the end point of that advice is really to bring someone from a point of not being able to afford their energy to a point of being comfortable in their home. And we use lots of different strategies. There's a real focus on cost saving, so we do that through switching to the best, enabling or teaching people how to switch to the best deal, how to engage in energy markets to get discounts such as the warm home discount or water shore, getting people to think about a route out of debt and supporting them on the route out of debt, helping them to reduce energy demand and particularly unnecessary energy demand, improving energy efficiency in their homes, so getting funded measures, loft cavity, underfloor insulation, advocating with energy companies, advocating with landlords who are not fulfilling their legal responsibilities, getting people white goods, emergency top-up vouchers, referring onward to other community organisations where someone's issues move beyond energy. So we currently have 6 advisors working in SELCE. They are a wonderful team. They're a multilingual, multicultural team, many of whom have come to us through programmes such as the one you heard described, where they were initially volunteer champions. They've learned on the job, and then we supported them to get qualified. So last year we were doing most of we'd always done face-to-face work, but last year we switched to doing advice by phone, WhatsApp, Zoom, often having multiple conversations with somebody, exchanging documents over WhatsApp, merging calls to talk to energy suppliers. It was a very steep learning curve, learning how to do this remotely. We previously, in the previous year, we'd done a lot of energy advice at home, and as part of that, installed what we call light measures. So things like LED light bulbs, draft proofing, radiator reflector panels. We could no longer do that over the pandemic, so we converted to doing measures drops, putting a goodie bag of measures and instructions together and delivering it to people's homes for them to install themselves. We had to work out, we've always done a lot of co-working with other community and community groups. So community groups that work with pensioners or people who are on low incomes, resident groups. We had to find new ways of doing outreach. So we very much focused on developing those relationships with community groups. This is funded by a tapestry of funders, and I'm very pleased to see UKPN here, one of which was Power Partners. Thank you very much. It was a real lifesaver. Power Partners co-funded the development of our phone remote energy advice service alongside Crew. But we're also funded as we also work as part of a strategic fuel poverty alleviation partnership. And Martin, if you want to say anything about this, please do. But from my perspective, this is key. So we work cooperatively with other providers in our local area and with our local authorities. We're part of a strategic fuel poverty alleviation partnership that goes under the brand name South London Healthy Homes, operates across South London. There are a number of delivery partners. And basically, this has been a real lifesaver. It enables us to chat for local authorities to channel funding to us, but also ensures that we are not fighting, we're not wasting our time fighting over funding or clients or relationships. We're co-working. We supported 996 vulnerable households. And that actually translates into, more like a double, treble the amount of advice sessions we held. Most people we were talking to on a number of different occasions, iteratively supporting them over a series of phone calls. The reduced energy costs amount to 312,000 or £313,000. We also, for the first time, calculated the CO2 emissions that resulted from our advice on demand reduction and behaviour change through provision of light measures and also installation of grant-funded measures. It's 173,000 kilograms of CO2. Actually dwarfs our solar work. A bit embarrassing in some ways. But yeah, this is part of the transition, enabling low-income people to transition, to also benefit from, to also be part of that transition. So I suppose one of the things to the take-home messages is really about coordination is key. And so very much like to put it out there to the Community Energy London community that we could cooperate in drawing down funding for this work. We could cooperate in delivering some of this work, making a tapestry of groups who are locally networked, bound to their local communities, know a huge amount about their local communities. And funding this work is takes a huge chunk of my time. It is extremely difficult to keep in funding, to keep a team in work the whole year round. And I think co-working together could support some of that. Anyway, so many thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. I'm very proud of what we're doing. I'm not bragging. I just wanted to give people a sense of how it can very much enhance what your group is doing.
Thanks, G. I'd just quickly like to open up the floor for any questions, and also to maybe then introduce to hear from attendees if this would be an area that they would like to develop for themselves, or maybe there should be a separate group for focusing on fuel poverty within CEL, or alongside the other different approaches, or if it's okay as we are. But initially, so how much did Sarah, you as a Duncan, so the amount of funding that we get in to have that impact, I mean, I would echo that a lot of the work, just because it's not quick and it's not cheap and it's not easy, this work, but it's also very difficult to get funding to do it in the way that it needs to be done to meet funders' expectations of targets, to have a quality project that actually helps people, and also to keep together as an organization to keep it running. I mean, you saw that was our new office in the background there. So SELCE bucked the trend of everyone leaving offices in the lockdown, and we moved from a small office to an office 3 times the size of what we've previously had for the last 6-7 years. So, you know, we like to buck a trend in the community energy sector, don't we? But yeah, so to probably to impact about 1,000 households, which isn't just one person generally, and it isn't just you know, for that year, but it's G said, yeah, it's about 100k to be able to affect positively those 1,000 households. And what can funders do to make it easier for community energy groups? Oh yes, wow, how long's a piece of string? You can't really do, I said to someone a couple of days ago, you can't really do that much meaningfully with anything less than 20 grand. And yes, we managed to use the ELSEF funding that we got through CEL very judiciously, but we also put a lot of untracked, unpaid volunteer hours to make sure that those projects worked, didn't we, Cara? Cara's nodding there, yes, not just making it up, Alex. So any questions or comments from the floor before we have a bit of a wider discussion about fuel poverty and energy efficiency in community energy?
I just speak.
There's a question there. Oh, Duncan, go ahead. But Alex, while Duncan's saying something, there's a question by Michael in the chat column as well. You might have a look at. Go ahead, Duncan.
Yeah, I don't know whether Alex or G answered how much that project cost. It'd be really interesting to know. The other thing was when we set up Brixton Energy, one of the reasons for our community energy efficiency fund was to make the stuff that we were generating, as it were, the bling that was attracting everybody on the roof, go further. And it'd be really interesting to to see if you can calculate the energy demand reduction of the households you intervene with, so that you can say our rooftop does 20 average houses, but if everybody did one of our courses, it would do 35 houses, just so that you can show the value of energy efficiency to increased penetration of renewables.
Interesting comment, thank you, Duncan. Yeah, there's something about the sustainability of the organisation. When we started SELCE, our simple social business model that we'd use the profits from the renewables to support the fuel poverty and energy advice work, it's kind of almost been the other way around, not through direct funding, but through contribution to the core costs of the running of the organisation, if there's ever been that available. But generally, I think there's about 2 out of about 30 funders I've looked at that will actually fund core costs. So that's a very difficult one, but you need to have the stability of the organisation to then support and maintain and keep those key skilled members of staff that you get. And we also, you know, having a career path for these people, as well as all of us doing this as voluntary or paid workers within this. So Michael's question, how do you get a project off the ground? Is it a catch-22 with funding? You need something up and running to get something in place, or robust? Yeah, okay. So with so I'll talk about Crew. So Crew Energy started trained up the core group of founder members and directors to do sort of pop-up energy advice cafes and desks around the in southwest London. Then got a couple of larger projects, including some funding, very much appreciated. Again, a shout out to Michael and the Power Partners project. And then, you know, rather than being viewed with suspicion by the local authorities, they start to go, okay, they kind of know what they're doing, and maybe we won't just think, why are you doing something we should be doing or in control of? To fast forward a few years, after building up the volunteers and attracting skilled people from the local area, we've just, in partnership with another Community Energy London partner, secured 120,000 to run a project over 2 years for three boroughs, Merton, Wandsworth and Richmond, which are Habitats and Heritage in partnership with Crew. But we couldn't apply to the Energy Redress Fund as on our own, so this is another barrier which is pretty disgusting, and it's a dark art trying to get that funded anyway as well. So starting off slowly, organically, building up the skills internally and externally, and the credibility and the kind of local reputation, with working with the local authority as well is absolutely key. You can do it without them, but why would you want to? So showing that you're, you know, reliable and trustworthy and consistent, and that you're not just a flash in the pan of a bunch of do-gooders wanting to do some good and then gonna poke off when we decide we want to do something about recycling or something or other. So any other questions before I've just got a last question to the group to hear from anyone else in the room lurking, either with their cameras off or just listening in. Glyn, hello Glyn.
Hello there. My experience of giving advice, both as a local councillor and as a shop steward over many years, it's a very difficult thing to do. And one has to worry also about one's liability of giving advice to people. That you could suddenly find yourself in a situation where someone's suing you, whether the landlord or whatever it might be. Do you, when you're trained, I think your scheme's absolutely fantastic, really marvelous what you're doing. But how do you make sure that people don't put themselves in a situation where they could be sued by some vexatious landlord, or even possibly, I live in Barnet, which is the end of the world up here, you have the local authority leaning on you anyway. I mean, obviously, some local councillors might resent the feeling that you're coming into their pictures. I mean, silly thing like, and it is small-minded, but it does exist. How do you train people to make sure they don't put themselves in financial or legal difficulties in giving advice?
Do you want to take that question, G?
Sure. It's about training their advisors, making sure that they're qualified, and essentially, you know, all the advice actually is not advice; it is guidance. You know, everything is.
Sorry, G, that was very muffled. We didn't catch that. Could you say that again, maybe a bit closer to the mic and clearer? Thank you.
Oh, I've got a headset on. I don't know why it's not working. Maybe they.
We need to buy you a new one, clearly.
Clearly need to buy me a new one. Anyway,
funding.
It's really about making sure your advisors know what they're talking about, and that you put the resident in control.
Yeah.
So you are saying very much, here is what I would advise, it's your call. Yeah. And if it's very much their call, then, you know, it's their call. Similarly with landlords, basically with a lot of landlords, we very much take the approach of, you know, not going in heavy. We very much say, okay, well, you know, if there's a problem, if the house is unfit, we'll approach the landlord with it. Well, how about we help get grant funding for you to improve it? Yeah. So we've never had a claim against us. Yeah, I can't think we've done over about 6,000. We've worked with over 6,000 or 7,000 houses now. I've lost count.
Sorry.
So, yes.
Sorry, G, it was a bit muffled and garbled, that last part of what you said.
All I was saying was that we've worked with over 6,000 or 7,000 households over the years now, I think, if you add it all up.
Yeah, that's about right.
And we've never had a claim against us. So
we were a member of Advice UK for a while, but we don't. We're advising. We're not giving financial advice, so we're not liable for any. It's all discretionary, and we never force or require anybody to do anything at all. It's all up to the choice of the person or household resident that we're dealing with. So it's up to them to choose. The only time which it could be slightly difficult is if they were saying, well, which energy company would you provide? But then that's when we train people to bring in the which survey or highlight the top 3 or the citizens advice feedback or what have you, and, you know, bat it back to them in that point. So yeah, it's a concern, we're mindful of it, but it's about training and keeping your staff and volunteers up to date with the latest thinking. As we're kind of starting to run out at the end of our slot, what I would like to do is just put a bit of a challenge out to all of you groups that haven't or wouldn't currently dip your toe in the water of doing such projects. We've shown it can have an impact on the carbon savings. We've shown it can have an impact on this sort of empowering local people, so they're not, you know, going, is it a toast or a cereal day because there's no electricity to put the toaster on. You know, we know that the next few years for those more vulnerable in our communities, it's not going to get easier. I'm not Mystic Meg, but it is not going to be easier. And so do we have a responsibility as, you know, enthused, active energy geeks to be getting out there and using our skills in a slightly different way to benefit? And it does contribute to really easing the climate emergency. However, what would put you off as a group? Is it just something that you don't have the capacity for? Is it something that you don't think you'd have the interest of your members? You're already good at connecting in the community and doing outreach things and banging the drum to get funding for different projects or investors. But my question is, if you'd just like to pop any ideas or comments in the chat, what could CEL do to help those groups and members of CEL look at doing these sorts of projects? Or what asks, maybe it could be a wider that, you know, we are lobbying the GLA or UKPN or Ofgem or whoever it is, you know, what do we, or CEE, what do you need as a group to look at stepping up and into doing this type of work? That's my parting shot. I'll just, SELCE have just done a really interesting piece of research with Energize Sussex Coast and Colin Nolan, our friends over at, in Hastings, and it was UE, wasn't it? Not Bristol University. I should know, I went to UE. And then looking at the return on investment, it's not 1 to 9K. I mean, that's pretty impressive. I mean, obviously that was a little bit of a typo there. We're not that good. Yeah, so if there was something that could help reassure, or a longer term program that could could, very good, thanks Duncan. It's the dyslexic gals in action again, isn't it? So, you know, what could you have or need to lobby your group internally, or you need to see from funders, and what more could CEL do to help facilitate more community energy advice projects happening? So that's my last. Oh, and I've just spotted Laura is in the group. So Laura, this is an example, a living example. She started off as a volunteer with SELCE and crew. She got a taster of doing paid work through the Energy CEL funded project. Sorry, Laura, I'm talking about you. You can keep your camera off and stay anonymous. Don't worry about it. Or you can put your camera on and give everyone a wave. And now she's employed full-time working for SELCE as an energy advisor. So she's done that journey of becoming as a volunteer and being very passionate and dipping her toe in it herself, and now we're very lucky to have her as our latest recruit to the SELCE family. So anyway, I've only gone over by 5 minutes, so
yeah, no, but that was some really valuable things there, Alex, and it's given me a number of ideas in what we need to do. And just to mention, of course, one of the things that we're going to be seeing over the coming months is an awful lot more funding coming for fuel poverty. That was pledged by the government even before the crisis that we're experiencing at the moment, and will experience over the next 6 to 9 months as kind of fuel bills, especially over the winter season, feed into families' household bills. But before we move on to that bit of a debate, which I'll just mention a few things. First of all, thanks to Cara, Giovanna, and especially for Alex for steering these projects through. Thanks particularly for the GLA, because this money was on top of the London Community Energy Fund feasibility and capital funding money to provide core funding to CEL, which we dispersed in 2 tranches, one for some project officers work, which I'm going to flag up in a second with Catherine's help, but 2 in terms of the projects that groups delivered, which we're just kind of gathering together all the bits of output, presentations, evaluation reports, and we'll make available on the CEL website over the coming weeks. So thanks to all of you for also preempting me as well about thinking about those evaluation reports, which is really good in actually bringing that together.